The death penalty, also known as capital punishment, dates back to the 18th century and has been used all over the world in many civilizations and countries. But is the death penalty moral? With all the controversial evidence supporting both sides, it may be hard to understand or be able to pick a definitive side on the issue. For the most part, in my opinion, though, it seems wrong, and I'm going to explain why. I'll begin by defining the death penalty, what the death penalty is, how lethal injection works. Then I will tell you a little bit about the history of the death penalty, and finally, I will give you some statistics on the death penalty and some reasons why it is immoral and should not be used. The death penalty, as defined by uslegal.com, is the sentence of execution for murder and some other capital crimes, especially serious crimes such as murder, which are punishable by death. The most common and humane use today is lethal injection. There are 3 stages in lethal injection process for the death penalty, and it is used in place of other methods because it is the only method considered to be humane. The first injection is an anesthetic called sodium thiopental, which is a fast-acting barbiturate that depresses the activity of the central nervous system. Basically, it puts a person to a deep enough sleep so that theoretically they cannot feel the pain that will come with the next injections. The second injection is pancuronium bromide, and it acts as a neuromuscular blocker, preventing the nerve messengers from communicating with the muscles. Finally, potassium chloride is injected, and this chemical fluid floods the heart with charged particles that interrupt its electrical signaling, stopping it from beating. Each of these 3 injections is followed by saline, a neutral substance commonly used to push a drug into the bloodstream more quickly. Even though lethal injection is what we use today, that has not always been the case throughout history. The death penalty dates back to the 18th century BC, as I stated earlier, and was used by King Hammurabi and his code for 25 different crimes. In addition to Hammurabi Code, Hittites Code in the 14th century, Draconian Code in the 7th century, and Roman law in the 5th century all used different forms of the death penalty, some more severe than others. These death sentences that were carried out over the centuries included crucifixion, drowning, beating to death, burning alive, and impalement. In the 10th century AD, hanging became the most used method, especially in Britain. But in the 11th century, hanging came to a halt, only for a short period though, because as stated by the Death Penalty Information Center, William the Conqueror would not allow persons to be hanged or otherwise executed for any crime except in times of war. The following centuries took a turn and many new methods were created. These methods include boiling, burning at the stake, hanging, beheading, and drawing and quartering. In the United States, the history of execution starts with the colonists who came from Britain. They mostly adopted British rules of capital punishment. This slowly changed, though, as the colonies began to develop their own laws. In 1791, the Bill of Rights was modified, and the 18th Amendment was added. The 18th Amendment stated that the use of cruel and unusual punishment was outlawed. In the 19th century, the development of jails and tailored justice to each individual crime became popular, and in some states, the death penalty was abolished. At the turn of the 20th century, the death penalty began to fade out because most felt it was morally wrong. But that changed dramatically after World War I, and all states who had previously abolished capital punishment reinstated it. In the 1950s, after World War II, capital punishment was on a decline again, and it wasn't until 1972 in Gregg versus Georgia when the court ruled that the haphazard way in which it was administered was constitutionally impermissible. This means that if the states required humane ways of capital punishment, then it was legal. Lethal injection now became the humane way to kill someone, and it was first used in Texas on December 7, 1982, on Charles Brooks. Now that I've told you a little bit about the history and the ups and downs of the death penalty, I'm going to tell you some reasons why the death penalty is immoral and why it should not be used. The death penalty is immoral for many reasons, mostly because basic values say that one man does not have the right to determine whether or not another man lives or dies. As stated by deathpenalty.org, almost all religious groups in the United States regard executions as immoral. In addition to the death penalty being moral, it is also fairly costly. When a person is tried for capital punishment, they have to go through a court system, so there is a less chance of making a wrong accusation. In a case where one has been convicted of manslaughter, they also have to go through many appeals, which becomes costly. An alternative is when the jurors sentence someone to life in prison without possibility of parole. This is cheaper because even though we have to pay taxes to keep them there, it costs less than it would to put someone on trial for capital punishment going through the various appeals. Another reason why not to use capital punishment is because it has been proven that it does not deter crime in any way. It has also been proven that states without the death penalty have statistically lower murder rates than states with the death penalty, as stated by deathpenalty.org. Therefore, it does not make sense why you'd use the death penalty when you could use an alternative and just put someone in jail for life. So now we come back to the question, is capital punishment, or more commonly known as death penalty, moral? From what I have researched, I have decided that it is wrong and that there are better alternatives. Even though it has been used throughout history, we have to change our ways and not repeat our history.